So today we will be talking about some topics that might be a little bit tough on some viewers. Parental discretion is definitely advised. Emotional and psychological discretion is too. Feel free to comment or ask questions at any time. And be aware that we know that this is a tough issue, and we understand if some of you might need to step out for a little bit.
Please don't be afraid to step out for a moment. This video will be available on our sites, on all 3 sites, as soon as we wrap up here. So you can always come back and revisit when you are comfortable. So we're talking about abusive relationships and power dynamics. And abusive relationships, they don't often start off abusive. I mean, like any other relationship, they start off with the butterflies and the hearts and things of that nature. And there may be things that we don't like about our partners, but that doesn't necessarily telltale an abusive dynamic. So I know that there are some telltale signs of an aggressor, correct?
Yes, and you are perfectly right. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Even during the dating stage, there might be things that trigger that gut feeling that I know that we have. And so can you outline for us, what are some of those red flags that we should be looking for when we first step into a relationship?
You know, against what our gut and Hollywood tells us, a perfect relationship is always a sign of a bad relationship. If this guy is constantly telling you like, oh, you can trust me, or this girl is telling me, oh, you can trust me, I'm by your side. If they start isolating, if they constantly tell you, I just want to be with you all the time, I can't wait to see you again, and there is no room for breathing as individuals, then that's definitely a red flag. It is normal for us to be in a new relationship and we want to spend our time with this new person that we just got to know. And because we do have the butterflies, right? We do have those chemicals in our brain that are shooting up and telling us that the chemistry is just wonderful. But that is definitely, once we start becoming addicted to being with that person and we want to be, and that person is describing those feelings of, I only want to be with you, I can't wait to see you again, give me a call one more time, and it's just constant, that's a definite red flag. And that is the one we're going to see the most often in these perfect relationships when everything is just wonderful. And I think that's the #1 red flag that doesn't seem like a red flag.
Oh, that's very interesting. Wow. Now, how do we know, Esther, when a relationship has crossed that line from being maybe uncomfortable to abusive? Can you define that for us? I know when I exited my my relationship, I didn't define it as abusive. I would never have defined it as abusive. It was something that needed to be defined for me to go, oh man. So can you help us outline that so we can start solidifying that definition?
Ooh, this is a tricky question. Okay, toxic versus abusive. Toxic is still when there's something wrong. This is moving in the wrong direction. It's like vinegar. It tastes funny. You don't really want to swallow it. When it's abusive, you have definitely drank the vinegar. You know it's bad. You know it tastes awful. You know you should probably drink some water, but you can't. And in an abusive relationship, it's definitely that. You want to get out. You don't know how. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to go to. The support systems might have been failing you. This is how you can definitely know that it's an abusive. It's now you're just drinking the vinegar. You don't know what to do. It's toxic. It's so toxic. You're in that pool of toxicity. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Toxic, for example, can be when your partner is calling you names and you stand up and you say, like, you know what, I don't like this. That's toxic. When there's that constant conflict. Abusive is when your partner keeps calling you names. You already told them to stop and they continue. And they continue. And you're like, maybe they'll change someday. That's abusive. There's no There's no what to call going back, you could say, or respect for one's boundaries.
Understood, understood. And what are some things that characterize an aggressor? And are there other factors, environmental factors, psychological factors, etc., that increase the chance or the opportunity for aggressors to participate in that shift, in that power dynamic?
I'm sorry, you cut off from my end. Can you repeat that again?
Absolutely. What are some of the things that characterize an aggressor? And are there other factors, environmental factors, psychological factors, etc., that increase the chance or opportunity for aggressors to participate in that shift in dynamic?
Absolutely. So an aggressor, in order for an aggressive behavior or an aggressive person to show their true face or true colors, they need to have an unprepared victim, a safe environment, and that equals to the perfect attack. The unprepared victim is us, or the person who will become the victim. Of course, it says it right in the name. And this victim is usually not expecting to be attacked. So this is the woman, for example, or the man who marries into their perfect partner, with their perfect partner, only to discover once they're married that they're abusive. And that is the unprepared victim. If you knew that the partner was going to be in that abusive, you would have never gotten involved in that situation. And that situation itself is the environment. Now, the attacker or the aggressor is in the comfort of their own home, of their marriage. It's an emotional, psychological, and physical space where they feel safe to commit this act of aggression, and the victim is not going to be able to defend themselves.
It's interesting that you say safe environment. Can you, because when I think of the word safe, I don't think of it as a word in the pejorative. I think of it as a comforting word. So when you say safe environment, can you define that for us?
The victim must feel safe. The victim must feel safe.
Oh, okay.
The victim must feel safe, and the aggressor must also feel safe. So, for example, we feel safe at the comfort of our own home. So sometimes when we take a shower, we don't lock our bathroom door. We feel safe. The aggressor feels safe that in your house, you do not lock the bathroom door. So he feels safe that he can go in there and there's not going to be any risk.
Safe is where we have let our guard down. Safe is where where there's no suspected attack or no suspected aggression at all. So safe is nobody can see, nobody's let into this world, and we've let our guard down a little bit. Is that
exactly?
Okay.
So this is what makes us an unprepared victim. You know, I wish you could see the video right now, but if we're walking down the street, right down the alley, and we are aware of our surroundings, we're usually like have a kubaton or something in our hand. We're walking around, right? But if we feel safe walking down that alley, we're probably on our cell phones, not unaware that there might be somebody walking around us. So we feel safe, and that makes us unprepared. For an attacker, safe means that
I know. Esther, if you can hear me, I'm going to... you're here! So essentially, if you are on guard and you are carrying something to protect yourself with, then it's no longer a safe environment. You've taken away that element of safe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Now, and this is a question that we get fairly often. I don't know if you get this question often, but is abuse gender specific? Is abusive behavior gender specific? So is it only reserved for men? Is it only reserved for women? Is it only reserved in a heteronormative couple? Where can abuse be present?
Everywhere. Everywhere. And it is interesting. Today I was reading, I don't know if you guys have seen this book, Why Does He Do That? And obviously it's very gendering, but it is very similar to what I have read about female abuse. Both sexes are prone to abuse when pushed to the limit or when taught that it was normal to be abusive. Studies show that the rates in an LGBTQA community, for example, for domestic violence, are very similar, if not a little bit higher, than heteronormative relationships. So it happens everywhere, and everybody can become an abuser. And it doesn't matter the age. A lot of people say, well, they're only teenagers, they cannot be in an abusive relationship. That's a lie. Or we say they've been married for 70 years. That's not an abusive relationship. That can be farthest from the truth. You know? So abusive, to become an aggressor, there is no age, there is no gender, there is no sex, there is not even a social status, and there's definitely no cultural status.
Thank
So
you.
anybody, anywhere in the world.
I'm so glad that you mentioned age. Please, as an educator, remember, as a teacher, abuse and manipulation start very, very, very early if allowed. I mean, I'm so glad that you're categorizing here as well to make sure that we know that definition is not exclusive of anybody at any age, anything. Now, this is a difficult question to ask because I understand that there are so many aspects to it, but what are some of the ways that we can prevent becoming part of an abusive dynamic?
The number one thing to not be part of an abusive dynamic is setting clear and rigid boundaries with everyone you meet. It is part of human nature that we like to break boundaries. You know, our parents told us not to touch the hot stove. That's exactly what we want to touch, you know? And partners do that, you know? And it's not a game, but I was reading yesterday about how if a girl or if a boy tells their sexually active partner that they're virgins, that sexual tension becomes even more so because the now sexually active person likes to push those boundaries. Oh, I'm going to take away their virginity. And the same thing happens with any form of boundary or relationship. If we say, no, we cannot do this, the other person, the aggressor, is going to want to push that boundary and see where you're going to allow yourself to, where he's going to find a little hole in your net to go through. Okay. And that is when, that's the number one thing. If as soon as a person crosses the boundary, you need to say, stop. That's enough. If they continue pushing, you know that person is an aggressor and you need to get out of there. And you need to establish, I am leaving right now because of this. You're not respecting my boundary. Don't just say, you know what, I'm done with this, bye. Because that way the aggressor never knows what they did wrong. And sometimes when we catch the mistake early, it can be fixed. You know, we have, kind of like a child, we have to tell them what they did wrong so they know exactly what behavior we don't want them to do.
So you mentioned boundary pushing and maintaining, you know, making sure that you're setting your boundaries. Is boundary testing in and of itself abusive, or at what point does boundary testing become abusive?
It becomes abusive once you have said no, and once the person continues pushing, and once there's a breakdown of emotional and psychological barriers, or physical barriers too. So, for example, you say no, you continue pushing, and now I start thinking, like, maybe there's something wrong with me. And now I start questioning myself and my own boundary. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe they're right, and totally gaslighting, because then they're going to come and they're like, yeah, you're totally wrong, you're taking this the wrong way. And that itself, like gaslighting, and that's like doubting yourself, that's abusive.
So this goes back to that gut feeling that you were talking about. If you start feeling like there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with the dynamic, or if you're starting to question it, that's when you start crossing that line. That's where we need to start being aware of what's going on within the dynamic. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And, you know, obviously you have to use your own prerogative in this. You know, maybe it is something that there can be some things that are wrong. For example, let's say your partner is telling you that you're doing something wrong constantly, like you don't know how to manage your money. I'm going to take control of the finances because you don't know how to manage money. And it turns out that your bank account is always on zero because you spend it on lottery tickets. That's not being abusive. But if your partner is constantly telling you you're wasting a whole bunch of money and you're not doing this right, you don't know how to do accounting, but you spent the money on groceries, on rent, on medical insurance, on you just paid bills, and you explain this to your partner is telling you, no, this is your fault. That's when we start crossing those boundaries of toxic and abusive, and so you definitely have to look at the whole picture. We can't say one specific behavior it's abusive. The perfect example is parents, for example. We as parents like to know where our child is at all times, right? I mean, your 14-year-old daughter is not going to say, hey, bye, Mom, at 10 p.m. And you're going to be like, okay, cool, peace, see you. You're going to be acting, hey, wait, where are you going? Who are you going with? What are you guys going to do? That's not being abusive, Now, if you say, your 10-year-old daughter comes up to you at, whatever time and tells you, hey, I'm going to be hanging out with so-and-so, and we're going to be doing this and this and this at their house. And then you go like, I don't want you to have your cell phone. I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to breathe. I want you to have your hair up in a ponytail. I want you to wear your sneakers. I want you to do this. Then that becomes a control issue. So why is the aggressor doing this at this point? Is it because they're trying to control you, or are they trying to protect you? And that is how you can see where this abusive comes. Control is abuse. Protection is not.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that context in there. And I really appreciate that you're adding behaviors on both sides. And so I guess that begs the question, but who is at fault for toxic dynamics? I mean, is there culpability? And do we have any control of the situation on either end?
Oh, no. That's a tough one.
And I know,
when we're talking about,
it's a hard thing to talk about. It's a very difficult thing to talk about, period.
I believe, and this is a personal opinion, of course, that if we have to think about our own autonomy, on our own resiliency, and that we have our own voice, and maybe not voice physically, but we can say stop, no, leave, then I have to say that both are culpable. Obviously, one more than the other. But both people, both the aggressor and the victim, have power to stop that dynamic at any time. How we do it then becomes difficult. Can an abused woman leave in abusive relationship? Absolutely. How they do it becomes the issue now. Creating the exit plan, creating that support system. But there's ways to do it. But the aggressor obviously is going to make it as hard as possible. And so, there is culpability from both sides, but definitely the aggressor is always the one at most fault here, in my opinion.
I understand that. Speaking of which, because we're talking about both parties being involved. Recently, Evan Rachel Wood testified in support of the Survivors' Bill of Rights. I don't know if you saw that cast, but in the recording, which was intensely heartbreaking, she details the extreme abuse that she endured, and she mentioned that she went back often. So this happened for a very long period of time, even though the abuse was often torturous, literally torturous. And as someone healing myself from an abusive relationship, leaving was the hardest thing to do. Leaving was oddly harder than staying and enduring said abuse. So for me, I didn't leave until my children became involved inadvertently. But that's my personal journey. How do we know when enough is enough? Like, how does one know when to leave an abusive relationship? How do you come to that decision?
That is a very personal decision. Everybody has to make their own decision of when enough is enough. And that's scary. That's a very scary thought. Because there's some people who see their children become physically, emotionally, and psychologically abused, and they stay because for them it's not enough. If I were, you know me, and I also come from an abusive relationship. If I were to go back in time and be able to say, this is when it needs to stop, it's at the first boundary crossing. Maybe second, at the most. Um, but the truth is that our brains love love. All those little endorphins that are in our brains when we visually see somebody and then we emotionally start having those attractions for them, our brains love that high. We love it. I mean, it's our own little dose of our little heroin, cocaine, and, you know, meth ball in our brain. I mean, all those chemicals. And that's why that's why we in an abusive relationship continue going back to our abusers, because it's a higher dosage that we need. We need a higher dosage of those gut feelings, that little high that we get. And we know that high is only going to be very short-lived. And if you talk to any drug addict, they're going to tell you that the high that they get from the drug is very short-lived compared to the pain, but they keep using. And it is very similar. Those same feelings and that same physical, because it can hurt. I mean, that physical separation from your abusive partner can physically hurt. Mm-hmm. And it's mostly because it's, you know, it's withdrawal. You're withdrawing from all those chemicals. It's hard. So it's completely understandable, and people need to understand that if you or a loved one is in an abusive relationship and you want to get out but you feel that you can't, it is a completely normal feeling. And the best way to do it is to go back to your support systems and have them give you that extra high that you need instead of your partner.
You know, and I explicitly remember getting those gut feelings right from the start and leaving this person within a couple of weeks. But there came a time where, like, I know, like you said, the perfect relationship and a movie-like relationship can often, or that abusive relationships often mimic the perfect relationship. And I remember the begging and the beautiful gifts and the beautiful gestures to try and get the relationship started again. And I would even think that too. Oh, this is just like in the movies. This is just like the way it should be. And going back because of that manipulation and that emotional blackmail over and over and over again.
See, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it was just kind of like the movies, because we are trained by the movies. If you look at the movies, right? It's usually, especially the teen romance movies, usually a guy or a girl who are below the social status of the love interest. And usually they want a relationship with this, you know, the potential love interest, the guy, you know, or the girl that's desired by everybody else. And usually that love interest treats the victim, I'm going to call it victim, badly. But the victim keeps trying, and they try again, and they try again. And usually the love interest at some point will give in. And then eventually they build that relationship, and there's a lot of conflict, usually, you know, friends or relatives telling them, like, hey, this isn't going to work out, everything is going against them. But those people just keep fighting against everything. And if you think about it, this is what happens in abusive relationships. Usually our friends and our relatives tells you, like, there's something going on here that doesn't mesh right. But no, but the flowers and the chocolates and the sex, you know, like, this is wonderful. What are you talking about? But there's constant conflict. You get home and it's like, hey, you know what? He said this. Oh, no, she said that. Why do you have your cell phone? Why do you have this? And behind closed doors, there's so much conflict. But no, it's that love interest, because there's flowers and chocolate and movies, and it's going to be a fairy tale in the end. We are so programmed to love this dynamic of toxic honeymoons, I guess you would call them. We love those toxic honeymoons. We know that there's going to be a fight in 2 weeks, but hey, right now everything's perfect. And it gets us back to the cycle of violence.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No.
The giver and the caregiver mentality too, the empathy of, I know where they came from, but I know that his household was abusive, and I know why he's doing this, and I think that we can work through this, and that kind of the caregiver mentality too. I remember was one of those aspects of it as well. But
Well, absolutely. We all, especially as women, we love, a lot of us women have that savior complex.
savior complex.
You know, we want to save everyone.
Now, during the time of COVID, how has the stay-at-home order affected those who are in abusive dynamics? What are we seeing? What are the trends that we're seeing?
The trend is that domestic violence is going up. And this is expected. A lot of abusers or aggressors take out their stress on their victims. And it is hard when you are an aggressive person and now there's nothing to release that aggression. You can't leave your house to go to the mall or go to the movies or have a beer with the guys or with the girls. You know, and all of a sudden, who do you take out that aggression on? You know, eventually you get tired of sitting down and watching Netflix. Now you need something more physical. You need to release it. And it's sad. And the thing is that even people who would not describe themselves as abusive or aggressive are becoming or are showing signs of aggression. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I am a very aggressive person. I love punching and kicking. I have my own body bags. I teach self-defense, so don't get me wrong. And I love doing this. But I'm also an extrovert. I get energy and release from talking and hanging out with my girlfriends and my guy friends and having that moment where it's just off. It's just, I'm not at home. I'm not in this environment that I'm usually stressed out in. I get to go and relax. Now I'm stuck at home 24/7. I had to go buy my bag to release that physical aggression. I had to put my daughter back in daycare because it's stressing. And as an extrovert who can't go out, I have one stressor. As a person who loves going out to eat down at restaurants, that's another stressor. I can't do what I want to do for entertainment. As a person who needs hugs from friends, that physical connection with people, I can't do that. Another stressor. I need to be able to go out for long drives, and I can't do that because now I have my daughter. I need that escape from my work environment, and I can't do that. That's another aggressor. And if you're a single mother, right, and I put this on Facebook and you laughed, the military uses children's songs as a form of torture. My child calls it parenting. And it gets to me sometimes when I'm tired of listening like, the ants go marching on, hurrah, hurrah. And there gets a point where I'm just like, I need to step out. And when we are not taught healthy coping skills when we're younger, that I need to step out becomes get out, and you become aggressive and you take it out on somebody else instead of taking like, you know what, I need to step back out. I need to reassess what's going on. Let's think. Let's calm down. Let's breathe. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've called you several times during this time where I'm just like, let's calm down. Let's breathe. I'm starting to get all this stress, very stressed out. And a lot of aggressives can't do that.
I really appreciate that you brought up, so you mentioned the dynamic between a parent and a child. Is all the information that you're giving us right now, is that exclusive to romantic relationships? All of the information about the dynamic and the resources that we're going to give, is that exclusive only between romantic partners?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Just like there's parents who abuse children, there's children who abuse parents. There's grandparents who abuse grandchildren. There is, children who abuse grandparents. Abuse, like I said, it has no cultural, social, age limit, gender, sex. It can happen anywhere, and it can happen with any relationship. Even friendships can become abusive.
Mm-hmm. I would think
so
for that. I think you're really covering a lot of depth and dynamics here. So for our viewers, that everything we're talking about right now, this is not limited to romantic partners. parent versus child versus parent, caregiver. So if you are in a toxic or abusive dynamic, please, these resources are for you. We had a viewer who asked if we had any resources or advice for to give to somebody who is in an abusive dynamic right now, in a toxic dynamic. So what are some resources that you can offer to anybody who's decided it's time to leave, or somebody who's trying to make that decision, maybe recognizes but is trying to make that decision of leaving?
The first step is recognizing that you're not alone. That is the first resource I'm going to give you. You are not alone. And that is very powerful, and you have to own that. You're not in this situation because you're dumb. You're not in this situation because you're weak. This happens, and it means nothing. It says absolutely nothing about who you are as a person, because you are strong for having to endure that. Let's just get that straight. That's the first resource. You have to own up that you're not alone. The second thing is your support systems. Look at your support systems, your friends, your family, any loved ones. And I put those different because I have friends that are family, and I have friends that I don't necessarily love sometimes. But if you have to look at your support systems, your school. If you're a student, your school counselors are a great person to go ask for help. Your teachers too, your principals. If you're a housewife, your church or church member, go to your church, ask your minister for help. There a lot of churches have ministries. There's CAFB, the Center Against Sexual Assault and Family Violence here in El Paso. The district attorney has a domestic violence office where you can get restraining orders, personal protection orders, even custody arrangements worked out. So those are the main resources that are here in El Paso. There's plenty of shelters specifically designed for battered women and battered men too. El Paso has a shelter for battered men, I believe. Children, El Paso Center for Children houses children that are in an abusive relationship, not only with their partners, but also with family members. So there's resources. If I knew what your situation was, I could definitely guide you to more specific ones. But there's plenty of resources. But I recommend the DA's office. One of the very first things that I recommend, if this is an abusive relationship where you need to get out now, call CAFB, call the center, it's women's shelter, and see if they can get you into a house. Don't tell your partner that you're about to leave. Usually that they're going to try to insert more control. Before you go to battle, you never tell your opponent what your next move is going to do. Yeah, exactly. So you wanna do this stealthy. This is war. And when I teach self-defense, the physical part, I always say, this is war. You're going to fight to win. You're not going to hold back. And so you have to think about it very strategically.
Absolutely. One of the things I remember, Esther, and I don't know if you remember this, so Esther and I have been friends for almost 20 years now, for those of you who are watching us. I remember when I was in my dynamic, I specifically remember Esther telling me one day, I know that I can't make you leave this relationship, but if you ever need it, message me. Just send me some weird message that's not characteristic of you, and I will know that I need to do something. And that's something that you can do with a friend, is to kind of give your friend this little wink, hey, if you ever need me to call the police or call somebody for you, send me a message asking for something strange.
Exactly.
And I can do that for you. And I don't know that I can ever thank you enough.
I love random text messages, first of all. But this is actually a trend that's happening on Facebook. And I've noticed that on Facebook there's people like, if you need help in a domestic violence situation or you need a wellness check, tell me if I'm selling makeup. Ask me if I have this product available, and I'll send help. And I love those. I love those. As if you're gonna post something like that, though, Be aware that there is an emotional, psychological thing that you're asking your friends to do. So be ready to provide some form of support. And support can be as simple as saying, hey, I'm here for you if you need to talk while you're, going to the restroom. It can be, hey, you know what, tomorrow I'll make the tacos and send them your way. And it always definitely has to be that you're able to provide a resource outside of yourself. You have to have the number for CAFB, for a mental health office, for a friend who is a psychologist, somebody who's not emotionally attached to the victim, the police department or something like that. I'm one of those friends where you tell me something happened to you and I'm like, who do I have to stab? I say it in a very joking manner. I say it in a very joking manner. But at that point, we can also become the aggressors in a different form of dynamic. We try to protect our friends, but we also don't want to be in jail for the rest of our lives because we're trying to protect ourselves. Not only that, but if the aggressor has a weapon, a knife, a gun, and you're trying to get yourself in between your friend because, you love your friend or your loved one, you're setting yourself up in harm's way. And you have to think about those things. If you're going to be saying, like, hey, you know what, if you need help, contact me, be ready to provide help.
Thank you. Thank you. So, moving forward, how can one prevent becoming a part of a toxic dynamic? What can we do? If anybody watching us, maybe you're not part of a toxic dynamic, what can we do to prevent becoming part of or another toxic dynamic?
Learning red flags is definitely one of those things. You have to learn what some red flags are, which ones you're going to tolerate, which ones you're not going to tolerate, what your boundaries are going to be. So that's the first sign. Know some red flags, and think with your brain, not with your heart, if that makes sense. When you see some red flags, mark them as red flags. Don't try to justify the behavior, because once we start justifying the behavior, we're starting to lose the battle. There is a saying that says there's no, there's no fairness in game and war. There's no in love and war. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. If anybody's listening, what is that? Because now I can't think of it. There's no... All's fair in love and war. All's fair in love and war.
All's fair in love and war. Yes. And and it's interesting because love and war are complete opposites, but there's a very thin line between them. And if we start justifying if you're thinking about military, for example, and you start justifying what the opponent is doing, you're basically justifying why you should lose. And when we justify red flags in our relationship, we're justifying their behavior for attacking us.
I would have never thought of it that way. Oh my gosh. That's a complete...
think about it, like, oh, he hit me, oh, he pushed me, but that's because I told him that his breath stunk. And I'm being heteronormative because I'm in a relationship,
No, you're right.
I told him, like, oh, honey, you have stinky breath. And then all of a sudden he pushes me. I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been that, I shouldn't have been that mean.
That needs to be into a quote. If you're fighting a war and you justify, oh, they're shooting at us because they've had it.
Exactly. Think about it.
Wow, that needs to be turned into an acronym. Meme.
No. It's kind of funny, but it's true, Usually they say that there can only be opposites into such a level until they become full circle. And this is love and war. And that saying is basically like, this is love, this is war, here they meet. And it's less than one finger away. It's just one line. And they're very similar. So if we start justifying red flags, like we justify our opponents winning, we're kind of setting ourselves up for not fighting and not giving it our all. And this is war. Relationships are war. And they're war that can be the most beautiful things, where you fight the world against, with everything. And at that point, you also have to question, at what time is this relationship war worth it?
Do you want
know,
to live
who are
with
you
this
fighting against?
every single day? Do you want to live with this dynamic for the rest of your life? That's a good
Exactly.
question to ask.
And yeah, sorry, I'm like, we could go on for 10 hours.
I know. I'm trying to cut it down because I know we could. When we have our personal talks, I know those go on all night, so we should probably. So I guess in closing, is there a message that you would like to give our listeners who are reading or who are ready to exit an abusive relationship?
I have definitely a quick message for everyone. If you're a parent, if you're a mother, if you're a father, if you're a son, if you're a student, create a toolkit. And parents, particularly parents, this is a very tough topic to talk with your children. But you are somebody that your children are going to look up in regards to what a relationship is going to be like. Their future relationships are going to be shaped by your relationships. And so talking to your children about what healthy relationships look like and mentioning that physical aggression is never okay within a physical relationship, within an emotional relationship, is necessary. And a lot of parents forget that. A lot of parents think that, oh, they're 13, there's no physical abuse happening at that age. Well, there is. Mm-hmm. You need to be aware of that as a parent. So let's start talking by setting up examples of what healthy relationships look like. The second one is that you as an individual have to write down what your boundaries are. Don't think of them in your head.
Write them down?
Basically, write them down. Because we are driven by emotions. A lot of people are driven by their emotions and what's happening in their environment. And this is where we say that whole justification of red flags, right? If one of our red flags, for example, is like, no-go for me is for a boyfriend on my first date to try to grab my boob, right? And then I go on my first date, and my now prospective date is grabbing my boob. But he had just told me that he has not been, he just came back from war, and he needs, to get laid, whatever. And I start justifying, like, oh, but he just came out from war, so that's okay. I'm reacting emotionally to that. I'm justifying, I'm reacting emotionally. But if I physically write it down, like, no man is going to touch my boob on the first date, that's clear. That's in writing, There's no justification of that. Imagine writing a justification note where you're going to have to be like, this is my boundaries, and these are going to be the justifications. And you're going to be 30 volumes down the road, 500 pages each, and you're still going to be in the first point for your boundaries. So establish clear boundaries that it's written in stone, and importantly, your friends and your relatives can see what your boundaries are. Because that way, when you go to your friend and you try to justify the behavior after, and a night out, and your friend calls you out, like, hey, this is a boundary that you wrote down. Why are you justifying that behavior? That's not your friends calling you out. That's you calling yourself out. And your friends pointed it out. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. Be aware of who you are. Be in control of your environment. Emotionally, physically, mentally. Be aware of where you are at all times. If you're feeling aggressive, say, I'm feeling aggressive. Why? What's causing me to have this stress? If you're feeling sad, why are you feeling sad? Oh, and then you can rectify the behaviors, And the same thing with environment. Cyber, cyber stalking and cyber abuse is a real thing too.
Do you mind if I'm using something really quickly in regard to being aware?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought. Be aware, I was assaulted 15 feet from the door of a very, very busy restaurant. Be aware at all times.
Yeah.
There is no space limit. There is no time limit. There is no distance limit. Be aware.
And now that you mentioned that, a lot of the times when the perfect time for an attack to happen when you're going to your car is when you're looking for your keys and putting them in the keyhole, because usually very distracting and very focused on where the key is going, so you can put it in that silence to grab you from behind. So when you're fumbling for your keys and you're really focused on doing something, it's very important. And I don't have my keychain, so usually I have keychains that look kind of like this. And this is my old one. But I usually have my car key, and that way I hold it while I'm walking to my car. I have my key right there. And if I need to strike, I have my pepper spray ready, and I have my kubaton, my striking tool, so I can hit somebody with this.
So I shouldn't carry around this keychain anymore then?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. I mean, unless you want to horn the person to death. I'm going to glitter you.
Thank you. Sorry, I totally took you off track there. So,
wrong message. Also, always contact who assaulted. Don't ask yourself, and this happens a lot in college campuses and even high schools where there's been drinking involved and there's minors. Did this just happen? Is this okay? The first question should always be like, hey, do you have the police numbers, the non-emergency police number? Don't question what happened. Don't definitely give a report. You don't have to give a report right away, but don't question what's going on.
Don't gaslight yourself.
Your gut tells you if there's something wrong, there's something wrong. Like, that's definitely something that you should have in your toolkit. Listening to your gut needs to be up there with important tasks. And if something does happen, if you are assaulted, if you are, touched, grabbed, definitely call the police, call the SAAM department, the sexual assault nurse examiner, so that way they can collect evidence. It does not mean that anything's going to go forward or that you have to press charges. It just means that you're collecting evidence. Sometimes
that you're acknowledging what happened to you. You are giving yourself that permission to acknowledge what happened.
Exactly. And even if you say, you know what, no, I'm not going to pursue anything, at least to give somebody who wants to do something about it a fighting chance, or more of a fighting chance. Because then they can see if there's enough DNA from one particular perpetrator, there's a trend there. And so it'll be helpful in the long run to somebody else. I guess. And definitely, if somebody tells you, like, you know what, I heard this story about this guy that he's very violent, or I've heard this story about this girl that she's very controlling. Those little stories that people tell you, listen to those. Listen to those more than those chemicals in your brain. And I know it's so hard.
I know. But I guess our message to you is, when you decide to take that first step, the healing begins when you take that first step. And as two people talking to you who have exited toxic and abusive dynamics, it's going to physically hurt. And what it's going to take is for you to fight through that discomfort and recognize that you're worth more. Esther was saying to write down your boundaries and write down what you're willing to tolerate. And even if that list is 35, 50 pages long, you're worth it. And if it means waiting, it means waiting. But the healing begins as soon as you take that first step. Exactly. And parents, if you have young children, now is the perfect time to get them used to writing about boundaries. This is where my teacher can touch me. This is where I don't feel comfortable. And honor those boundaries. If they tell you, I don't like auntie and uncle to hug me or to touch my cheek, don't tell them, it's okay, honey, you're just exaggerating. That's a boundary that they want to establish, and honor that boundary. When they see uncle and auntie and they start touching the cheek, protect your child. Say, you know what, they don't like that. We would really appreciate it if you would back off. And if they continue, that's definitely a red flag that you as a parent have to pay attention to. But this setting boundaries is an exercise that can be practiced at any age. And we need to. Yes. Remind them they don't have to be polite about it either. If they repeatedly say, please don't do that, it's okay. It's okay to walk away or say, don't touch me. You don't have to be polite when you feel your boundaries are being crossed. That's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you don't have to say it smiling either. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, this is something that happens a lot when I'm teaching self-defense, where we act out, potential rape situations, and the girl, usually this happens with girls, right? Because guys are more affirmative. They tend to be more affirmative when they're saying no. Girls, we're taught to be polite, so we say, no, I don't want that. And we always say it with a smile in our face. What message does that send? And it's a visual thing. What does our body language say? It sounds completely different to say like, no, actually, you're kind of making me uncomfortable, than saying like, hey, you know what? You're making me uncomfortable. Back the fuck off. That's clear. There's no, maybe she meant something different. And we need to allow our children and ourselves to practice that. If somebody at the grocery store is coming too close behind you in your cart, especially now with the spacing distancing, say, excuse me, you're invading my personal space right now. Back off. You don't need to say, hi, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I feel uncomfortable. Could you back away a little bit? Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, be direct.
And that goes back to you telling us at the very beginning, set your boundaries firmly, be immovable about your boundaries. They are not elastic. They are yours. You deserve them. Keep them. Keep them intact.
Exactly.
Is there anything
don't justify
yes, thank you. Don't justify the breaching. Don't justify elasticity. They're yours. Keep them. That's what makes you. And as you start letting those go, and as you start being elastic about your boundaries, you start feeling like you're losing pieces of yourself.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm projecting here.
No, but it's true. Because then it makes us feel that our boundaries are not valid, and why are they not boundary? And are we wrong? Are they wrong? But mostly we're always going to say that we're the wrong ones. If we start thinking that the other person is the wrong one, then we might have to look at narcissistic behavior on our behalf, and then that makes us the aggressor, which is scary. So.
Is there anything that you would like to add as we reach the ending of our session here?
Be firm. No means no. Yes means yes. You can always back out from a yes or from a no. That is yours to own. Own your words. The other one is create your toolkit. Who are the people that you can rely on? Have on your phone. I have on my phone saved the El Paso Police non-emergency phone number. Have that phone readily available. Call CAFP, look into their website, see what resources they have to offer. Because if you're going to offer help to somebody, make sure that you are ready to offer help. And like I said, from an objective bystander, somebody who can actually help. Don't send them to your neighbor who's 95 years old and doesn't know, anything. Contact somebody who can actually help physically, emotionally, and psychologically. You have to. If you're going to offer help, be able to offer those. And always carry something like this or like this. Remember, you're going to say, oh, I'm only going to go to my mom's house. Well, what's going to happen once you leave your mom's house? An attack can happen anywhere. You are not safe anywhere. And it's scary. I'm not trying to make you go paranoid, but always remember that you're never safe anywhere. Once you start thinking you're safe, that's a perfect time for somebody to attack. I love SquarePeg.
I love EP Self-Defense. Remember, guys, that healing begins once you take that first step.
Yes.
That first step. That's it.
Yes.
So again, I'm Melody Gomez, Executive Director, Facilitator, and Educator of SquarePeg Youth Empowerment. You can find us on social media at SquarePeg Youth. You can find us on our website at square-peg-youth.org to take a look at our projects. Again, we're a youth-based project, youth-led project-based mentoring service. Youth come to us. We provide the resources, the people, and the skill sets to help bring those projects to fruition. Esther?
And I'm Esther, Executive Director of EP Self-Defense Initiative. And we provide holistic self-defense. We not only look at the physical aspects of self-defense, like kicking and punching, but we also look at the, psychology of an aggressor. We looked at victimology. We look at the circle of violence, everything that has to do with self-defense. Self-defense is holistic. It starts with your own self. What boundaries you're going to set up. So self-defense starts with yourself so that you can protect yourself from the outside. And that's what we do. Also, stay tuned because soon we will do What Were You Wearing Again, which showcases the lives and stories of victims of sexual assault. And we're hoping this year is going to be a virtual museum, so everybody's going to be able to go. And it'll be awesome. Oh, epselfdefense.org is our website. And we're also on Facebook and Instagram.
Also, while we're on that note, really quickly, SquarePeg is offering a summer enrichment program for youth, and one of those classes that will be provided is Safe Touch and Consent for youth. So this is where we start building that foundation and start building that framework for humans, because we have to remember our youth are not a separate demographic. They're rookie humans. They are humans looking for direction. We are all humans looking for direction and guidance. So this is a very fun, very interactive way to teach our youth about consent and safe touch, what no means, what yes means, etc. So please take Esther's self-defense classes. They're so much fun. She's just a fun person and makes the classes a lot of fun. They're super informative, and there's a lot of hands-on practice too. So take a look at our site. We want to thank FronteraFolx for being the hosts of this series. You guys do so much for the community and for UTEP, and we really appreciate you. Thank you guys very much. Keep in contact, like us, follow us, and ask us any questions. When we post these, we'll try to post some of the numbers and some of the resources that we mentioned during the filming.
Yes. Thank you all for joining. See you soon.
Bye.